This week, we conducted a penetration test and took over a client's network using unrestricted file share access. Let me tell you how we did that. This week, we actually started off by discovering that they had some legacy broadcast protocols that were in use. And then with that advantage on their network, we were able to coerce one of their computers, or actually one of their users, to relay or authenticate with us, and then we relayed that authentication to their LDAP server on their Active Directory domain controller, and obtained what's called an interactive shell. And with that, we were able to dump all the Active Directory information, like who your users are, what groups they're in, what computer names are out there, and basically get some good information from their domain. We weren't able to create a computer account, which is a lot of times one of our go-to moves when we get this interactive shell. But our client actually very smartly made it so their regular user accounts can't create computer accounts, which is not the default on most networks. So they actually were a little bit more prepared than some of our clients that we've seen. But with this information, now we had all their usernames. We actually conducted a password spray attack against all of their user accounts. And we discovered one user account that had a really weak password. And with that access, now we actually had a username and a password of a low-level user account against their domain. We decided to go see what any user can access in terms of file shares. And so we discovered they had what's called a deployment server on their network, and that deployment server had a file share that is accessible by any user on their network. And inside that file share, we found a clear text username and password to an account that was allowed to create computer accounts. And then armed with that information, we actually were then able to create a computer account. And why this is so important was one of the other things that we looked at was their certificate authority. And so we've seen lately a lot of organizations have some misconfigurations on their certificate authorities on their networks. And in this particular case, we found a template on their certificate authority that basically we look for three things when we're auditing templates. One, is the template enabled? Two, does that template allow for client authentication? And then three, the big kicker is the enrollee that can request a certificate to be issued allowed to supply the subject? In this particular case, we found a template that matched all three of those criteria, and regular users couldn't issue this certificate using this template, but a computer account could. So once we found that a user that could create computer accounts, we created our own computer account, and then we enrolled a certificate using this vulnerable template. And then instead of enrolling for that computer account, we said, oh, no, we want to create we want to issue the certificate for a domain administrator. And so because of those parameters on the certificate authority, we were able to then issue what's called a PFX, or certificate, for a domain administrator account. And then with the domain administrator account, we could go get the NTLM hash and do a pass the hash attack against the domain controller and dump the entire ntds.dit, which stored all the hashed passwords for all users and computers on the network.
Tom, do you have any takeaways on how companies can help prevent this from happening to them?
Yeah, so I mean, whereas in this particular case, definitely, removing broadcast protocols off your network is the legacy ones. Basically, the computers ask, hey, does anybody know how to get to this service? And we're like, yep, that's us. So removing those old broadcast protocols where asking anybody on the network, how do I get to a resource, is critically important to remove from your network. It was great to see that this client in particular limited regular user accounts from being able to create computer accounts, but they had that deployment share with the accessible credential, so that when they build up a new computer, they need to better secure that deployment share, so nobody can just discover those clear text credentials in order to talk to the domain controller with an authenticated user account. And then lastly, audit your certificate authority templates for those three things. Is it enabled? Is there client authentication? And can the enrollee supply the subject? Those are the three things. So there are some valid cases for that. Most of the time they're not. We've seen a rash lately where a lot of templates are allowing any subject to be issued when they can issue a certificate. And often that's not important to be able to do that. So those 3 things or 4 things, and they would have been better protected against our attacks.
Thank you, Tom.